Imagine a world lit only by firelight and the moon. Settlers, drawn by the promise of fertile land and a new life, poured into the frontier territories of Ohio, Indiana, and beyond. The mountains that stood sentinel to the east weren't just peaks of rock. In this era, before the rumble of the locomotive or the hum of the highway, water was life. Rivers were the natural arteries of commerce and communication. The Ohio, the Mississippi, these mighty waterways were the lifelines for the frontier. Farmers would load their harvests of wheat, corn, and salted meat onto flatboats and keelboats, embarking on a long, often perilous journey south to the port of New Orleans. It was the only viable route to market, a one-way trip dictated by the current. Getting their goods to the hungry cities of the East Coast, like New York or Philadelphia, was almost unthinkable. Transporting goods overland by wagon was excruciatingly slow and prohibitively expensive. It could cost more to move a ton of flour 30 miles over rough-hewn roads than to ship it all the way across the Atlantic Ocean to Europe. This created a paradox. The West was producing a surplus of food and goods, enough to feed the entire nation, yet it was trapped. The East, with its growing urban populations, needed that surplus, but couldn't access it efficiently. The economic potential of the young United States was being choked by its own landscape. A farmer in Ohio might watch his wheat rot in the barn, while a baker in New York struggled to find affordable flour. This wasn't just an economic problem, it was a national one. How could a country truly be united when its two halves were so disconnected? Leaders worried that the Western territories, with their economic ties pulling them south towards Spanish-controlled New Orleans, might eventually break away from the fledgling Union. The nation needed to be stitched together, bound not just by a shared constitution, but by shared commerce and prosperity. And so a dream began to take shape. It was an audacious, almost fantastical idea. What if you could create a river where nature hadn't provided one? What if you could build a man-made waterway that could slice through the mountains, defy gravity, and link the Great Lakes of the interior directly to the Atlantic Ocean? It was a vision of a water highway, an artificial river that would flow both ways, allowing boats to travel east as easily as they traveled west. People called it a fantasy, a little short of madness. They scoffed at the idea of digging a ditch hundreds of miles long through dense forests, across malarial swamps, and over solid rock. Where would the money come from? Where would you find the engineers with the knowledge to build such a thing? In a nation that had no formally trained civil engineers, no technical schools, the very concept seemed preposterous. The federal government, under President Thomas Jefferson, dismissed the proposal as financially and technically impossible, telling its proponents they were a century too early. But dreams, especially American dreams, have a stubborn way of persisting. This wasn't just a dream of engineering or profit. It was a dream of connection, of progress, of national destiny. It was a dream of conquering nature, not through brute force, but with ingenuity and sheer will. A group of visionaries, politicians, and ordinary citizens refused to let the idea die. They saw not a barrier, but an opportunity. They imagined boats laden with Western grain gliding smoothly eastward, and boats filled with Eastern manufactured goods, and hopeful new immigrants traveling west, weaving the fabric of the nation tighter with every passage. This is the story of that dream. The story of how a young, untested nation, against all odds, decided to build the impossible. It's a story of political battles, financial risks, incredible feats of engineering, and the immense human effort required to turn a wild idea into a world-changing reality. This is the story of the Erie Canal, the project that would unlock the American continent and redefine the future of the United States. It all started here with a simple, powerful idea, a dream of waterways. Imagine America in the early 1800s. It's a young, restless nation, pushing its borders ever westward. Vast forests and sprawling farmlands stretch as far as the eye can see. This was the frontier, a land of promise, but also a land of isolation. Farmers in Ohio and pioneers in the Great Lakes region were a world away from the bustling ports of the Atlantic coast. Rivers were the lifelines, the natural highways of the time. But nature had drawn a line in the sand, or rather a wall of mountains. The mighty Appalachian Mountains stood as a formidable barrier, cutting off the interior from the sea. Getting goods to market was a long, treacherous journey over land. A dream began to take hold, a bold and audacious idea. What if they could build their own river? a man-made waterway that could conquer the mountains and finally connect the heartland to the coast. This wasn't just a dream of commerce, it was a dream of unity, of truly building a nation. Imagine for a moment the year's 1810. America is a young nation, brimming with energy, its people pushing ever westward. They're carving out farms from dense forests, building new towns where wilderness once reigned supreme. It's a land of immense promise, but also of immense challenges. The greatest of these, distance. A vast, unforgiving distance that separated the burgeoning heartland from the bustling ports of the Atlantic coast. The dream was simple, yet audacious, to connect the interior to the sea. At this time, the primary highways were not roads of dirt or stone, but rivers of flowing water. The Ohio, the Mississippi, the Missouri, these were the lifelines of the frontier. Farmers in Ohio or Indiana could load their wheat, corn, and salted pork onto flatboats and float them all the way down to New Orleans. It was a one-way trip, a long and often perilous journey, but it was the only viable way to get their goods to a market that could pay. But here's the problem. While the western rivers flowed south, the nation's economic heartbeat in the eastern cities like New York, Philadelphia, and Boston. To get goods from, say, a farm near the Great Lakes to New York City was a logistical nightmare. You could try hauling them over land by wagon. But the roads, where they existed at all, were treacherous trails of mud and ruts. A team of horses could only pull a small load, and the journey took weeks, sometimes months. The cost was staggering. Often, the price of transportation was many times the value of the goods themselves. It was cheaper to ship a ton of cargo from London to New York than it was to move it just 30 miles inland. This was the great paradox of early America, a land of plenty, where farmers could barely afford to sell their surplus. The nation was growing, but it was also growing apart. The vast Appalachian Mountains stood like a great stone wall, dividing the country in two. So, the dreamers, the engineers, the politicians, they all looked at the maps. They saw the great rivers, they saw the mighty mountains, and they began to wonder, what if we could create our own river? What if we could build a waterway that defied geography, that climbed over mountains and cut through valleys? The idea seemed like something out of a fantasy, a man-made river stretching for hundreds of miles. But it was this fantastical idea, born of desperation and ambition, that would capture the imagination of a generation. This wasn't just about economics. It was about national identity. How could the United States truly be united if its people were so isolated from one another? How could a republic thrive if the interests of the West were so disconnected from the East? A waterway would be more than just a trade route. It would be a binding agent, a liquid thread stitching the fabric of a fragile nation together. The stage was set for an undertaking of epic proportions, a project that would test the limits of human ingenuity and endurance. It was a dream of water, a vision of a canal that would conquer the wilderness and reshape the destiny of a continent. This is the story of how that dream, against all odds, became a reality. It's a story of visionaries, laborers, and the sheer force of will that built the Erie Canal. Before this grand vision could even be attempted, the leaders of the day had to grapple with the sheer scale of the challenge. The proposed route, particularly the one through New York State, was daunting. It would have to traverse nearly 400 miles of rugged, untamed wilderness. There were dense forests to clear, swamps to drain, and solid rock to blast through. And most formidably, there was the problem of elevation. The land between the Hudson River and Lake Erie rose and fell by hundreds of feet. A canal is essentially a level ditch of water. How could you make water flow uphill? The answer, of course, was Locke's series of chambers that could raise and lower boats like watery elevators. He believed it was a project for 100 years in the future, not for their time. Wary of the cost and the constitutional questions of funding such a massive internal improvement, refused to help. If this canal was going to be built, the state of New York would have to go it alone. He saw what others couldn't, that this ditch could become an artery of commerce that would make New York the Empire State and its city the premier port in the world. He traveled the state tirelessly, persuading legislators, convincing farmers, and selling the dream to a skeptical public. The dream of a waterway was on the line, and its fate rested in the hands of politicians and the people they represented. Hey everyone, and welcome back to our journey through American history. Last time, we saw the birth of a nation, forged in the fires of revolution. But what happens asterisk after asterisk, the fireworks and parades? What does a brand new country actually asterisk do asterisk? Well, that's us what we're rediving into today. The story of a young America bursting at the seams, ready to grow. Imagine this. It's the late 1700s. The original 13 colonies, now states, are nestled along the Atlantic coast. But look west, beyond the towering Appalachian Mountains. That vast green wilderness. It's no longer just a line on a map controlled by a distant king. It's the future. It's land. And for thousands of Americans, land meant opportunity. After the Revolutionary War, a massive wave of people started pouring over the mountains. These weren't aristocrats or wealthy merchants. They were rugged pioneers, farmers, and families looking for a fresh start. They cleared forests, built log cabins, and planted crops in the rich, fertile soil of places we now call Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee. They were driven by a powerful dream: to own their own piece of land, to be their own boss, and to build a better life for their children. It was the American dream in its earliest, rawest form. But this created a huge new problem. Let's say you're a farmer in the Ohio River Valley. You've worked your tail off and grown a massive surplus of corn or wheat. That's great. But what do you do with it? Your neighbors are all farmers too, so they don't need to buy it. The big cities, the markets where you can get a good price, are hundreds of miles away back on the East Coast. Getting your crops there was a nightmare. The roads, if you could even call them that, were often little more than muddy, rutted tracks through the wilderness. Transporting heavy goods by wagon over the Appalachian Mountains was incredibly slow, difficult, and expensive. A team of horses could only pull so much, and the journey could take weeks. By the time your grain reached Philadelphia or Boston, the cost of transportation might be more than the grain itself was worth. This was a major roadblock. You could grow all you wanted, but if you couldn't sell it, you couldn't prosper. This is where rivers became the lifeblood of the new frontier. Farmers quickly realized it was far easier to float their goods downstream on flatboats. The mighty Ohio River flowed into the even mightier Mississippi River, which emptied into the Gulf of Mexico at the port of New Orleans. This was the superhighway of the 18th century. Farmer could load his harvest onto a boat and let the current do most of the work, sending his products to a global market. Yet even this route had its own set of challenges. The journey downstream was one way. Once you got to New Orleans and sold your goods, the flatboat was usually broken up and sold for lumber, because it was nearly impossible to haul it back upstream against the powerful current. The trip home was a long, often dangerous overland trek. More importantly, the crucial port of New Orleans wasn't owned by the United States. For much of this period, it was controlled by Spain, who could, and sometimes did, close the port to American trade, effectively strangling the economic life of the entire western region. The people living west of the Appalachians were tough and self-reliant, but they were also Americans. They felt isolated, disconnected from the rest of the country. They needed a reliable way to get their goods to market. They needed the government to understand their plight and secure their access to the Mississippi. The pressure was mounting. The economic survival of this vast new territory and the unity of the young nation itself depended on solving one simple, yet monumental problem: the need for cheaper, faster, and more reliable transportation. This challenge would spark a revolution not of muskets and cannons, but of ingenuity and engineering. It would lead to the era of canals, the invention of the steamboat, and the relentless push westward that would come to define America in the 19th century. The story of this expansion is the story of overcoming distance, of connecting a continent, and of turning a collection of frontier settlements into a powerful, unified nation.
Ow.
The demand for a better way to move things wasn't just about economics. It was about knitting the country together. The solutions they came up with would change America and the world forever. Thanks so much for watching. We've only just scratched the surface of this incredible period of growth and innovation. If you found this interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss our next chapter. We'll see you next time. Ever had an idea so big, so crazy, that everyone just laughed at you? Imagine proposing something that would fundamentally change the landscape of an entire country, only to have it dismissed as a foolish dream. Well, that's exactly what happened in the early 1800s, and the man with the big idea was DeWitt Clinton. Welcome back to our series. Today, we're diving into Chapter 3, the spark of an idea. And at the heart of this chapter is a man whose vision was as vast as the American frontier itself. DeWitt Clinton wasn't just any politician. He was the governor of New York, a man with ambition, foresight, and a stubborn refusal to accept the word impossible. In the early 19th century, America was a young nation, full of potential but facing immense challenges. The Appalachian Mountains stood like a giant wall, cutting off the bustling coastal cities from the rich resources of the interior. Getting goods from, say, Ohio to New York City was a nightmare. It was slow, expensive, and sometimes downright dangerous. You could ship things down the Mississippi to New Orleans, and then all the way around Florida, which took weeks. Or you could haul them over treacherous mountain roads on wagons that constantly got stuck in the mud. It was a logistical bottleneck that was choking the nation's growth. Leaders knew something had to be done. But what? A few forward thinkers had toyed with the idea of a canal, a man-made river that could connect the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean. But the scale of it was mind-boggling. We're talking about a waterway over 360 miles long, carved through dense forests, solid rock, and swampy marshes. There were no power tools, no dynamite, no civil engineering schools to train the people who would build it. The technology simply didn't exist. It was a moonshot, a century and a half before the actual moonshot. Most people scoffed. They called it a fantasy, a waste of money, an impossible undertaking. The federal government, led by President Thomas Jefferson, took one look at the proposal and said, "Thanks, but no thanks." Jefferson himself called the idea little short of madness. To him, as to many others, it was simply too big, too expensive, and too audacious. The nation had other priorities. But DeWitt Clinton saw things differently. Where others saw an obstacle, he saw an opportunity. He envisioned a water highway that would unlock the wealth of the American heartland. He imagined barges laden with wheat, timber, other goods gliding smoothly and cheaply from the shores of Lake Erie all the way to New York City, and from there to the rest of the world. He saw New York becoming the premier port not just in America, but on the planet. Clinton championed the cause with relentless passion. He traveled the state, giving speeches, writing articles, and lobbying anyone who would listen. He painted a vivid picture of the prosperity this canal would bring: bustling new towns, thriving farms, and a commercial empire built on the flow of water. He was a master salesman for an idea that seemed to have no buyers. His opponents, and there were many, were merciless. They mocked him in newspapers and political cartoons. They saw him as a self-serving politician, pushing a pipe dream to further his own career. They belittled his grand vision, giving it a sarcastic, dismissive nickname that they hoped would kill it once and for all. They called it Clinton's Folly. They called it Clinton's Big Ditch. Clinton's Ditch. The name stuck. It was meant to be an insult, a way to shrink his Grand Canal down to the size of a muddy trench in a farmer's field. The phrase captured all the skepticism and ridicule that Clinton faced. A ditch who would spend millions of dollars and years of back-breaking labor just to dig a ditch? The name was a constant reminder of how outlandish his proposal seemed to the average person. Think about the sheer political courage that required. In an era of cautious, fiscally conservative government, Clinton was asking for an unprecedented public investment in a project with no guarantee of success. Every expert said it couldn't be done. His political rivals were lining up to celebrate his failure. The public was deeply skeptical. Yet Clinton pressed on, he believed. He argued that this wasn't just about New York. It was about the future of the United States. It was about binding the young country together, not just with laws and a constitution, but with commerce and shared prosperity. This canal, this ditch, would be the artery that would pump lifeblood into the nation's economy. This is the critical moment in our story. It's the point where a single idea, born from one person's conviction, stands on the brink of either becoming a laughingstock or changing the course of history. DeWitt Clinton was betting his entire political career and the future of his state on a ditch. And as we'll see in our next chapter, the fight to turn Clinton's ditch from a joke into a reality was just getting started. The political maneuvering would give way to an even greater challenge, the monumental task of actually building the impossible. Thanks for watching. It's incredible to think how a name meant as an insult became a badge of honor for one of the greatest engineering feats in American history. If you're enjoying this journey, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you won't miss what happens next. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time. Ever had an idea so big, so crazy, that everyone just laughed at you? Imagine proposing something that would fundamentally change the landscape of an entire country, only to have it dismissed as a foolish dream. Well, that's exactly what happened in the early 1800s, and the man with the big idea was DeWitt Clinton. Welcome back to our series. Today, we're diving into Chapter 3, The Spark of an Idea. And at the heart of this chapter is a man whose vision was as vast as the American frontier itself. DeWitt Clinton wasn't just any politician. He was the governor of New York, a man with ambition, foresight, and a stubborn refusal to accept the word impossible. In the early 19th century, America was a young nation, full of potential but facing immense challenges. The Appalachian Mountains stood like a giant wall, cutting off the bustling coastal cities from the rich resources of the interior. Getting goods from, say, Ohio to New York City was a nightmare. It was slow, expensive, and sometimes downright dangerous. You could ship things down the Mississippi to New Orleans, and then all the way around Florida, which took weeks. Or you could haul them over treacherous mountain roads on wagons that constantly got stuck in the mud. It was a logistical bottleneck that was choking the nation's growth. Leaders knew something had to be done. But what? A few forward thinkers had toyed with the idea of a canal, a man-made river that could connect the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean. But the scale of it was mind-boggling. We're talking about a waterway over 360 miles long, carved through dense forests, solid rock, and swampy marshes. There were no power tools, no dynamite, no civil engineering schools to train the people who would build it. The technology simply didn't exist. It was a moonshot, a century and a half before the actual moonshot. Most people scoffed. They called it a fantasy, a waste of money, an impossible undertaking. The federal government, led by President Thomas Jefferson, took one look at the proposal and said, "Thanks, but no thanks." Jefferson himself called the idea little short of madness. To him, as to many others, it was simply too big, too expensive, and too audacious. The nation had other priorities. But DeWitt Clinton saw things differently. Where others saw an obstacle, he saw an opportunity. He envisioned a water highway that would unlock the wealth of the American heartland. He imagined barges laden with wheat, timber, other goods gliding smoothly and cheaply from the shores of Lake Erie all the way to New York City, and from there to the rest of the world. He saw New York becoming the premier port not just in America, but on the planet. Clinton championed the cause with relentless passion. He traveled the state, giving speeches, writing articles, and lobbying anyone who would listen. He painted a vivid picture of the prosperity this canal would bring: bustling new towns, thriving farms, and a commercial empire built on the flow of water. He was a master salesman for an idea that seemed to have no buyers. His opponents, and there were many, were merciless. They mocked him in newspapers and political cartoons. They saw him as a self-serving politician, pushing a pipe dream to further his own career. They belittled his grand vision, giving it a sarcastic, dismissive nickname that they hoped would kill it once and for all. They called it Clinton's Folly. They called it Clinton's Big Ditch. Clinton's Ditch, the name stuck. It was meant to be an insult, a way to shrink his Grand Canal down to the size of a muddy trench in a farmer's field. The phrase captured all the skepticism and ridicule that Clinton faced. A ditch who would spend millions of dollars and years of back-breaking labor just to dig a ditch? The name was a constant reminder of how outlandish his proposal seemed to the average person. Think about the sheer political courage that required. In an era of cautious, fiscally conservative government, Clinton was asking for an unprecedented public investment in a project with no guarantee of success. Every expert said it couldn't be done. His political rivals were lining up to celebrate his failure. The public was deeply skeptical. Yet Clinton pressed on, he believed. He argued that this wasn't just about New York. It was about the future of the United States. It was about binding the young country together, not just with laws and a constitution, but with commerce and shared prosperity. This canal, this ditch, would be the artery that would pump lifeblood into the nation's economy. This is the critical moment in our story. It's the point where a single idea, born from one person's conviction, stands on the brink of either becoming a laughingstock or changing the course of history. DeWitt Clinton was betting his entire political career and the future of his state on a ditch. And as we'll see in our next chapter, the fight to turn Clinton's ditch from a joke into a reality was just getting started. The political maneuvering would give way to an even greater challenge, the monumental task of actually building the impossible. Thanks for watching. It's incredible to think how a name meant as an insult became a badge of honor for one of the greatest engineering feats in American history. If you're enjoying this journey, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you won't miss what happens next. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time. Imagine for a moment standing at the edge of an unbroken wilderness. Before you lies not a clear path, but a seemingly impenetrable wall of nature. This was the daunting reality facing the visionaries of the Erie Canal. This wasn't just about digging a ditch. It was about conquering a continent. Welcome back to our series, where today we're venturing into Chapter 4, The Landscape of Challenge. The sheer scale of the task was mind-boggling. Proposed route stretched over 360 miles, cutting through dense ancient forests where sunlight barely touched the ground. Towering oaks and maples, hundreds of years old, stood like silent sentinels, their roots sunk deep into the earth. Each one had to be felled, not with chainsaws, but with the raw muscle power of men wielding axes. The sound of chopping wood have echoed through the woods from dawn till dusk, a relentless battle against a formidable green army. But the trees were just the beginning. Once the timber was cleared, the ground itself revealed its own set of nightmares. Vast mosquito-infested swamps, like the notorious Montezuma Marsh, lay in their path. This was a treacherous, disease-ridden quagmire. A soggy expanse of muck and mire that could swallow men and equipment whole. Workers toiled waist-deep in stagnant water, battling malaria and exhaustion. They weren't just digging a canal. They were trying to tame a primordial swamp that had existed for millennia. It was a place where progress was measured in inches, not miles. And if the flat, swampy lands were a struggle, the hills and ridges presented a completely different and equally formidable challenge. The geography of upstate New York is anything but level. The canal had to navigate a rugged terrain of rolling hills and steep inclines. How do you make water flow uphill? You don't? You have to meticulously carve a level path through the landscape, creating massive embankments and valleys and cutting deep channels through ridges. The most famous of these was the deep cut at Lockport, a monumental trench blasted and chiseled through solid rock for nearly 7 miles. Think about the tools they had. Not dynamite, not powerful excavators, but simple hand drills, black powder, shovels, and wheelbarrows. Every cubic foot of earth, every shard of rock had to be moved by hand, by animal, by sheer grit. The labor was backbreaking, relentless, and incredibly dangerous. Landslides were a constant threat, and premature blasts of gunpowder could be devastating. This brings us to perhaps the greatest challenge of all, a profound lack of expertise. In the early 1800s, America was a young nation. It had no professionally trained civil engineers. Europe had them, but America didn't. There were no engineering schools, no textbooks on canal construction, no seasoned experts to consult. The men who took on this project were, by and large, amateurs. They were judges, lawyers, surveyors, and self-taught mechanics. Men like Benjamin Wright, a county judge and land surveyor, and James Geddes, another judge with a passion for surveying, were thrust into leadership roles. They had to invent the science of American engineering as they went along. They learned from trial and error, devising ingenious solutions on the fly. They designed novel equipment, like stump pullers and earth-moving scrapers, because what they needed simply didn't exist. They were literally writing the book on large-scale civil engineering with every shovelful of dirt. Imagine the pressure. You're responsible for a project of unprecedented scale, with the nation's future and fortunes riding on your success, and you're making it up as you go. Your classroom is the swamp. Your final exam is a wall of solid rock. This lack of trained engineers was a gaping hole in their plan, a vulnerability that critics seized upon. The project was widely mocked as Clinton's folly or Clinton's ditch, with many believing it was an impossible dream led by unqualified dreamers. So the landscape of challenge was threefold: a formidable natural world of forests and swamps, a rugged and unforgiving topography of hills and rock, and a daunting intellectual void, the absence of the very profession needed to overcome the first two. It was a perfect storm of obstacles, each one massive enough on its own to doom the project. Yet they pressed on. Why? Because the vision was stronger than the obstacles. The promise of uniting the nation, of unlocking the wealth of the interior, and of proving to the world what a young, determined America could achieve, was a powerful motivator. The Erie Canal wasn't just built with shovels and black powder. It was built with ingenuity born of necessity and an unwavering belief in a better future. The men who faced this landscape of challenge weren't just digging a canal. They were laying the foundation for a new era of American innovation and ambition. The story of how these self-taught engineers overcame these incredible odds is a testament to the human spirit. We'll dive into their incredible inventions and solutions in our next chapter. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey today. If you're enjoying this series, please hit that like button. And be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. We'll see you in the next video. Ever had a brilliant idea? Something you knew would change everything? It's only to have everyone around you say, "Nope, can't be done"? Well, imagine that, but on a national scale. Today, we re-diving into the political firestorm that almost sank the Erie Canal before a single shovel hit the dirt. This isn't just a story about digging a ditch. It's a tale of political visionaries battling against a tidal wave of skepticism. Welcome back to our series on the Erie Canal. In our last chapter, we explored the monumental engineering challenges. But the truth is, the biggest obstacles weren't mountains or swamps. They were men in suits sitting in smoke-filled rooms in Albany and Washington. Do you see the idea of a 363-mile man-made river connecting the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean? Sounded like pure fantasy to many in the early 19th century. Let's set the scene. America is a young, scrappy nation, still finding its footing. Federal government is wary of big spending. When the champions of the Erie Canal, led by the tenacious DeWitt Clinton, went to Congress to ask for federal funding, they were practically laughed out of the room. President Thomas Jefferson, a man known for his forward-thinking vision with the Louisiana Purchase, dismissed the project as a little short of madness. He believed it was a project for a century in the future, not for their generation. Other congressmen were just as dismissive, calling it impracticable and a chimerical project. The federal government, concerned with coastal defenses and national debt, refused to spend a single dollar. They essentially told New York, "You're on your own." You'd think that would be the end of it, right? No federal money, no canal. But this is where the story gets really interesting. Rejection from Washington only strengthened the resolve of the canal's supporters back in New York. DeWitt Clinton, who was then the mayor of New York City and later governor, saw this not as a setback, but as an opportunity for New York to seize its own destiny. He tirelessly campaigned across the state, painting a vivid picture of a future where goods, people, and ideas flowed freely, transforming New York into the Empire State. But even at home, the fight was brutal. The opposition was fierce and vocal. Many New Yorkers, especially those in the southern part of the state and along the coast, saw no benefit. Why should their tax dollars be spent on a big ditch in the wilderness of western New York? They had their ports and their established trade routes. Political opponents mocked the project relentlessly, branding it Clinton's folly or Clinton's ditch. They published cartoons and scathing articles, portraying Clinton as a king throwing away the people's money on a harebrained scheme. Imagine the legislative debates in Albany. Opponents would stand up and argue that the cost was astronomical and would bankrupt the state. They claimed the engineering was impossible, that the locks would never work, that the canal would freeze in winter and be useless. They argued that it was a massive gamble with taxpayer money, with one legislator famously declaring they would have to find a river to feed the canal, and that was simply impossible. It was a constant uphill battle against a chorus of doubt. They feared that even if it could be built, it would never generate enough revenue through tolls to pay for itself. The political lines were drawn. On one side, you had the visionaries, the merchants from New York City, who saw the potential for immense profit, and the farmers and settlers in the West, who were desperate for a way to get their goods to market. On the other side, you had the fiscal conservatives, the political rivals of Clinton, and those who simply could not comprehend the scale and potential of the project. It was a classic showdown between ambition and caution, between looking to the future and being anchored in the present. The turning point came with a series of masterful political maneuvers by Clinton and his allies. They conducted detailed surveys, creating reports that were so thorough and convincing that they began to chip away at the skepticism. They made it a populist issue, framing it as a project for the common man, the farmer, the artisan, the pioneer. They appealed to state pride, arguing that if the federal government wouldn't help, New York would prove its own greatness to the nation and the world. In 1817, after years of relentless lobbying, impassioned speeches, and political arm-twisting, the New York State Legislature finally did what the U.S. Congress would not. They passed the bill to authorize construction of the Erie Canal, funding it entirely with state money. It was an act of incredible political courage and a massive gamble. The state issued bonds, essentially borrowing the dollar. $7 million needed an immense sum at the time, betting that the future tolls would cover the debt. The skeptics were still loud, predicting financial ruin. But on July 4, 1817, at a ceremony in Rome, New York, the first shovelful of dirt was dug. The political battle was won, but the physical war against nature was just beginning. The decision to go it alone, to defy the federal government and the naysayers at home, was the single most important moment in the canal's history. It was a declaration of independence for New York State, a bold statement that they would build their own future. And what a future it was. As we'll see in our next chapter, not only was Clinton's folly completed, but it became a staggering success, repaying its entire construction cost in less than a decade. It unleashed an economic and social revolution that far exceeded even its most optimistic supporters' dreams. It proved that sometimes the greatest obstacle to progress isn't technology or terrain, but a simple lack of imagination. The politicians who called it madness were proven spectacularly wrong. And the man they mocked, DeWitt Clinton, would be forever remembered as the father of the Erie Canal. This part of the story is such a powerful lesson in perseverance and vision. It reminds us that world-changing projects often start as ideas that everyone else thinks are crazy. What do you think? Have you ever seen a great idea almost get shut down by skepticism? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey through history. If you're enjoying this series and want to see how this incredible canal was actually built, make sure you're subscribed and have those notifications turned on for the next chapter. Hit that like button if you learned something new today. And as always, thank you for watching. Upbeat, inspiring music begins, then fades slightly to the background. Hello, and welcome back to our journey along the Erie Canal. We've talked about the dreamers, the politicians, and the surveyors who laid the groundwork for this monumental project. But now, we've arrived at a pivotal moment, a moment where dreams meet dirt. This is Chapter 6, the first shovel of hope. Picture this. It's July 4th, 1817. A day of celebration across the young United States, marking its independence, but in a small, unassuming town called Rome, New York. Another kind of independence is being declared, an independence from the tyranny of geography. On this day, the ground was officially broken for the Erie Canal. The speeches were made, the dignitaries applauded, but the real story wasn't in the ceremony. It was in the silence that followed, when the first real work began. Imagine the scene. There were no bulldozers, no excavators, no dynamite-wielding demolition crews like we'd see today. The toolkit for building this 363-mile waterway was astonishingly simple. Picks, shovels, wheelbarrows, and raw, unfiltered muscle power. The first men to dig into that New York soil weren't professional engineers in the modern sense. They were local farmers, recent immigrants, and laborers looking for a steady wage and a chance to be part of something historic. The initial section of the canal, the middle part, was chosen for a reason. It was the flattest and easiest to dig. This wasn't just a practical decision, it was a psychological one. The canal's commissioners needed to show progress. To prove to a skeptical public and anxious investors that this ditch was not just a fantasy, they needed a quick victory to build momentum. So, the work started. Men would line up, their shovels glinting in the summer sun. The rhythmic thud of picks hitting the earth, scrape of shovels against soil and rock, the squeak of wheelbarrow wheels. This was the symphony of creation, was back-breaking, relentless labor. They were digging a trench 40 feet wide and 4 feet deep, one shovelful at a time. It's almost impossible for us to comprehend the sheer physical effort required. Think about the conditions. They were often working in swampy, mosquito-infested land. The summer heat was oppressive. The winter cold was brutal. They contended with mud that could swallow a man's boots, unearthed massive, stubborn tree stumps from ancient forests, and chipped away at solid rock. These weren't just workers. They were pioneers, battling the wilderness with the most basic of tools. Every inch of progress was earned through sweat and strain. The workforce was a true melting pot. Many were Irish immigrants, fleeing famine and poverty, who saw the canal as a lifeline. They brought with them an incredible work ethic and a resilience that became legendary. They lived in rough shanty towns that sprang up along the canal's path, creating their own communities in the mud. Their contribution cannot be overstated. The canal was built on their backs. Local farmers, seeing the canal's potential to transform their livelihoods, would also join the digging crews during their off-seasons. This first shovel of earth in Rome, New York, was more than just digging a ditch. It was a profound act of faith. It was a tangible commitment to an idea that many still considered impossible. It represented the moment the Erie Canal transitioned from a blueprint in a politician's office to a physical reality being carved into the American landscape. Every shovelful of dirt moved was a small victory, a piece of the future being unearthed. It was a symbol of human determination, the belief that with enough grit and willpower, even the most daunting obstacles could be overcome. This wasn't just construction. It was a declaration. It's a declaration that America was no longer bound by its natural barriers. It was the beginning of a project that would reshape the nation, fuel its westward expansion, and turn New York City into the financial capital of the world. And it all started here in 1817, with ordinary men, simple tools, and an extraordinary amount of determination. That first shovel wasn't just moving dirt, it was digging the foundation for modern America. Thanks for joining me for this chapter. The story is just getting started, and the challenges are about to get even bigger. If you're enjoying this series, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next episode. See you then. Have you ever looked at a massive structure, like a Grand Canal or a sprawling railway, and wondered, who actually built this? We often hear about the masterminds, the visionaries, the big names in the history books. But what about the people who swung the pickaxes, who hauled the dirt, who laid every single stone? Today, we're going to pull back the curtain and meet the unsung heroes of one of history's greatest engineering feats. This is their story. Imagine waking up before the sun even thinks about rising. The air is cold and damp, your muscles ache from yesterday's labor, but there's no time to rest. You're one of thousands, a vast army of men, armed with little more than shovels, pickaxes, and wheelbarrows. This wasn't a world of powerful machinery and hydraulic excavators. This was a world of pure, raw human power. Every inch of this massive project was carved out of the earth by hand. Who were these people? They were a tapestry of humanity, woven together by the promise of work. Many were recent immigrants, arriving from Ireland, Germany, and all corners of Europe, seeking a foothold in a new land. They left behind everything they knew, chasing a dream of a better life. Alongside them were local farmers, men who worked their own land but needed extra income to support their families through lean times. They'd put in a full day of back-breaking labor on the project, then go home to tend to their own crops and livestock. It was a life of relentless toil. Let's not forget the engineers and surveyors. These weren't just men with blueprints. They were out there in the thick of it, slogging through mud and swamps, battling mosquitoes and unpredictable weather. They were the ones translating the grand vision into practical, day-to-day tasks, solving impossible problems with ingenuity and sheer grit. They had to figure out how to blast through solid rock, how to build aqueducts over raging rivers, and how to make water flow uphill. All with the limited technology of their time. Life in the work camps was rough, to say the least. The housing was often temporary, in crude shanty towns that sprang up along the construction route. Families lived in cramped quarters, often with little sanitation. Disease was a constant threat, and a simple illness could sweep through a camp with devastating speed. The work itself was incredibly dangerous. Landslides, accidental explosions from blasting powder, and construction accidents were tragically common. Medical care was minimal, and for many, an injury meant not just pain, but the loss of their livelihood. Yet, amidst the hardship, a powerful sense of community and pride took root. These weren't just coworkers. They were neighbors, friends, a family forged in mud and sweat. In the evenings, the camps would come alive. You'd hear the sounds of fiddles and folk songs from the old country, stories and jokes shared around a campfire. People shared what little they had, supported each other through sickness and loss, and celebrated small victories together. They were building more than just a canal or a railway. They were building new communities, new lives. Think about the sheer physical effort, day in, day out, digging, hauling, lifting. The sun beating down in the summer, the freezing mud clinging to your boots in the winter. They moved millions of cubic yards of earth, one shovelful at a time. It's a scale of labor that's almost impossible for us to comprehend today. They weren't just digging a ditch. They were reshaping the landscape, taming nature with their bare hands. And they were proud of it. You can see it in the old photographs, the look in their eyes, a look of exhaustion, yes, but also of fierce determination and accomplishment. They knew they were part of something monumental, something that would outlast them, something that would change the course of the nation. They could point to a section of the line and say, "I built that. My hands helped make this happen. This wasn't just a job. It was their legacy, carved into the very earth." Their contribution was immeasurable. They didn't just provide the muscle. It brought their cultures, their traditions, and their resilience. The towns that grew up along the construction route often became permanent settlements, melting pots of different nationalities. These laborers laid the foundation, quite literally, for the economic growth and expansion that followed. The goods, the people, the ideas that would later travel along these routes were all riding on the back of their incredible effort. So, the next time you see one of these marvels of engineering, take a moment, look past the grand design, and try to picture the thousands of individual people who made it a reality. Hear the clank of their shovels, the shouts of the foremen, the echo of their songs. They are the true builders, the forgotten giants of our history. Their names may not be on any plaques, but their story is written in every mile of track, every drop of water in the canal, every stone in the foundation. They are the people who built it, and their legacy deserves to be remembered. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the past. If you found this story as moving as I did, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into the hidden stories of our history. I'd love to have you as part of our community. See you in the next one. Welcome back to our journey along the incredible Erie Canal. In this chapter, we're diving deep into the nuts and bolts, literally of what made this waterway one of the greatest engineering marvels of its time. Forget everything you thought you knew about 19th century construction, because the story of the Erie Canal is a masterclass in innovation, grit, and pure genius. Imagine the task: carving a 363-mile trench through the rugged wilderness of New York. This wasn't just digging a ditch. The canal had to conquer a massive 568-foot elevation change between the Hudson River and Lake Erie. How did they do it? With a revolutionary system of locks. 83 of them, to be precise. So, what exactly is a lock? Think of it as a water elevator for boats. Each lock was a sealed chamber, typically 90 feet long and 15 feet wide, with a set of watertight gates at each end. When a boat entered from the lower side, the gates would close behind it. Water would then be let in from the upper level through a small sluice gate, slowly raising the water level inside the chamber and the boat along with it until it matched the level of the canal ahead. Then, the upper gates would open and the boat would continue on its way. Going downhill was the same process, just in reverse. It was a brilliantly simple concept. But executing it 83 times with the technology of the 1820s was anything but simple. These locks were built to last, constructed from massive hand-cut stone blocks. The sheer precision required was astounding. Each block had to be perfectly fitted to create a watertight seal, all without the aid of modern power tools. It was back-breaking work done by thousands of laborers, many of whom were Irish immigrants who chiseled and hoisted these heavy stones into place day in and day out. The engineering brilliance didn't stop at the locks. The canal had to cross rivers, valleys, and swamps. This is where aqueducts came into play. These weren't just simple bridges, they were water bridges, magnificent stone-arch structures designed to carry the canal itself asterisk over asterisk another body of water. The most famous of these was the magnificent Genesee River Aqueduct in Rochester. It spanned over 800 feet, supported by 11 majestic arches. Imagine the sight. A fully loaded canal boat floating serenely in the air, crossing high above a rushing river. It must have looked like magic. These aqueducts ensured a continuous level waterway, preventing the canal's flow from being disrupted by intersecting rivers. But what about when the land wasn't level? The canal route traversed hills and valleys. To maintain a consistent water level, the engineers had to build enormous embankments. These were essentially man-made ridges, constructed by moving millions of cubic yards of earth. Workers used nothing more than shovels, wheelbarrows, and teams of oxen. They would pile up earth, layer by layer, compacting it tightly to create a stable, waterproof channel. One of the most challenging sections was the Irondequoit embankment, which stretched for nearly a mile and rose to a staggering 70 feet in height. It was a monumental feat of earth-moving that demonstrated an incredible understanding of soil mechanics and hydrology. Perhaps one of the most unsung heroes of the canal's construction was a material that we often take for granted today: waterproof cement. At the time, standard mortar would dissolve in water, making it useless for building locks and aqueducts. The solution came from a self-taught engineer named Canvas White. He discovered a type of limestone near Chittenango, New York, that when heated and pulverized, created a hydraulic cement. This cement hardened underwater, making it the perfect binding agent for the stone structures of the canal. This discovery was a game changer. It not only ensured the longevity of the canal's structures, but also created a new American industry. Mills sprung up to produce this limestone cement, and its use quickly spread to other construction projects across the nation. Now let's go back to those 83 locks. The gates were the moving parts of this massive system, and they had to be both incredibly strong and perfectly watertight. They were constructed from heavy timbers, often oak, and were designed with a slight curve, or miter, where they met in the middle. This design used the pressure of the water itself to push the gates tightly together, creating a stronger seal. Opening and closing these colossal gates was a manual operation. A lock tender would use a long wooden beam, called a balance beam, that extended from the top of the gate over the land. By walking along this beam, they could use leverage to swing the massive gates open or closed. It was a physically demanding but essential job, repeated hundreds of times a day as boats traversed the canal. Consider the collective genius behind all of this. The chief engineersmen like Benjamin Wright, James Geddes, and Canvas White were largely self-taught. They were surveyors and judges, not formally trained civil engineers in the modern sense. They learned on the job, solving unprecedented problems with creativity and sheer intellect. They invented new equipment, like stump pullers and earth movers, to tackle the formidable landscape. They conducted detailed surveys, plotted the most efficient route, and managed a workforce of thousands with remarkable skill. The Erie Canal wasn't just a ditch. It was a symphony of engineering. It was a system where every component, the stone locks, the soaring aqueducts, the massive embankments, the innovative cement, and the ingenious wooden gates worked in perfect harmony. Each element was a testament to human ingenuity and the relentless pursuit of progress. The canal's builders didn't just conquer the landscape. They reshaped it, creating a man-made river that would change the course of American history. And that's the story of the engineering that built the Erie Canal. A tale of brilliance, hard work, and a vision that turned a wild dream into a stone-and-water reality. It truly was an eighth wonder of the world, built not by kings or emperors, but by ordinary people with extraordinary determination. Thank you so much for joining me for this chapter. The story of the canal is far from over, so if you're enjoying this journey, please hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. We'd love to have you along for the ride. See you in the next video. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our series. Last time, we left our intrepid builders on a high note, with progress surging ahead. But as any student of history knows, the path to greatness is never a straight line. Today in Chapter 9, we delve into the period when nature itself seemed to rise up in defiance. A chapter we call Nature Strikes Back. The project, a monumental undertaking, was entering its most ambitious phase. The workers, thousands strong, toiled under the relentless sun, their spirits buoyed by the visible progress they made each day. They had tamed the rock, they had diverted the streams. But they had not yet faced the full, untamed power of the environment they sought to conquer. The first blow came not with a bang, but with a trickle that grew into a roar. Unseasonal rains, far heavier than any recorded in previous years, began to fall. At first it was a nuisance, turning the sprawling work camps into seas of mud. But the rain was relentless. The carefully constructed diversion channels, designed to handle a typical year's flow, were soon overwhelmed. Rivers that had been placid servants of the project became raging torrents. One night, a flash flood tore through a lower valley camp with terrifying speed. It swept away months of hard work, dismantling temporary structures, washing away vital equipment, and tragically claiming the lives of several workers caught unprepared. The devastation was immense. The floodwaters receded to reveal a landscape of ruin. The project's timeline, once a source of pride, was now a mockery. Morale plummeted. How could they fight an enemy as powerful and unpredictable as the weather itself? Some whispered that the project was cursed, that they were disturbing ancient lands that did not want to be tamed. The leadership had to act fast to prevent a total collapse of the workforce. Instead of admitting defeat, the engineers and planners went back to the drawing board. This time with a newfound respect for nature's power. They redesigned the water management systems not just for the expected, but for the extreme. They built higher, stronger levees. They excavated wider, deeper spillways. A setback, as costly as it was, forced an evolution in their engineering. It was a brutal lesson in humility, teaching them that they weren't conquering nature, but rather learning to negotiate with it. The resilience began to show as workers, driven by a mix of grit and necessity, started the painstaking process of rebuilding, this time with wiser, more cautious hands. But the water wasn't the only foe. Where there is standing water in crowded human camps, another, more insidious enemy thrives. Mosquitoes breeding in the stagnant pools left by the floods began to multiply in plague-like numbers. With them came disease. Malaria and other fevers swept through the camps like wildfire. The project's medical facilities, already strained, were completely overwhelmed. At its peak, nearly a third of the workforce was incapacitated, shivering with fever or too weak to lift a shovel.
Ow.
The infirmaries became grim places, filled with the moans of the sick. The project was bleeding manpower not just to accidents, but to an invisible assailant. This was a different kind of war, one fought not with dynamite and steel, but with quinine and mosquito nets. The project's doctors worked tirelessly, implementing sanitation campaigns on a massive scale. They organized teams to drain every puddle of standing water they could find. They distributed netting and educated the workers on how to protect themselves. It was a slow, grueling fight, but gradually, the infection rates began to drop. The builders learned that protecting their own health was just as critical as laying the next section of track or pouring the next block of concrete. They weren't just building a structure. They were building a community capable of surviving in a hostile environment. On top of the floods and the fevers, the very nature of the work itself remained perilous. The terrain was unforgiving. Accidents were a constant shadow hanging over the workers. A misplaced charge of dynamite could trigger a catastrophic landslide, burying men and equipment in an instant. A snapped cable on a crane could send tons of material plummeting into a work site. Every day was a gamble. We have records from one particularly harrowing incident where a temporary railway bridge, weakened by the constant damp, collapsed under the weight of a supply train. The crash was thunderous, a horrifying screech of twisting metal. Miraculously, the crew managed to jump clear, but the loss of the locomotive and its precious cargo of steel and tools set back a whole section of the project by weeks. Each accident, each setback was a test of will. It would have been easy to give up, to declare the project impossible. But what emerged from this crucible of hardship was an extraordinary sense of solidarity and resilience. When a landslide trapped a crew, their comrades worked frantically, digging with their bare hands to rescue them. When disease struck a camp, those who were healthy shared their rations and tended to the sick. They were no longer just a collection of hired laborers. They were a unit, forged in shared adversity. They adapted. They developed new safety protocols after every accident. They created warning systems using lookouts and horns to alert workers to potential rockfalls. They became experts at reading the land, understanding its moods and its dangers. This period, though marked by tragedy and delay, was paradoxically what ensured the project's ultimate success. It forced the builders to become smarter, tougher, and more unified. They learned that brute force was not enough. They had to be adaptable, resourceful, and deeply respectful of the powerful forces they were working alongside. They were no longer just building a physical structure. They were building a legacy of human endurance. The scars left by the floods, the memory of the fever, and the tales of near misses became a part of the project's legend, a testament to the unyielding spirit of those who refused to be broken. They had faced nature's wrath and had not only survived, but had emerged stronger and wiser, ready for the final push toward completion. Thank you so much for joining us for this dramatic chapter in our story. The resilience of these builders is truly inspiring. If you found this story as compelling as I did, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our journey along the historic Erie Canal. Today in Chapter 10, we're exploring something truly remarkable, the birth and explosive growth of cities right out of the American wilderness. It's a story of how a simple ditch filled with water didn't just connect east to west, but created bustling centers of commerce and culture from practically nothing. Before the canal, this part of New York was a vast, sparsely populated frontier. But as the canal was dug, a miraculous transformation began. It was like watching seeds sprout and fast forward. Suddenly, where there were once just small outposts or dense forests, towns began to emerge, each with its own unique story and destiny tied to the waterway flowing through it. Let's start with Syracuse. Before the canal, it was a swampy, marshy area known for its salt springs. The local Onondaga people had been harvesting salt here for centuries. But the canal turned this modest resource into a gold mine. It provided a cheap, efficient way to transport heavy barrels of salt to markets across the country. The town was nicknamed the Salt City, and its population boomed. Factories sprang up, processing and packing salt. The wealth generated from this single commodity built grand buildings, established banks, and turned Syracuse from a boggy backwater into a major industrial hub. The canal wasn't just a path through Syracuse. It was its lifeblood, pumping prosperity into the heart of the city. Then, we travel west to Rochester. This city's story is all about flour. The Genesee River, with its powerful waterfalls, was already perfect for milling grain. But getting that flour to market was the real challenge. The canal solved that problem overnight. Farmers from the incredibly fertile Genesee Valley could now bring their wheat to Rochester's mills. The resulting flour, packed into barrels, was loaded directly onto canal boats. Rochester became the flour city, and for a time, it was one of the largest flour-producing centers in the world. The canal made Rochester a boomtown, attracting entrepreneurs, inventors, and workers from all over, all eager to get a piece of the action. The city's rapid growth was so astonishing that it became a symbol of the American dream in motion. Next up is Utica, a city that was already a small but established crossroads, and the canal, however, supercharged its importance. Positioned strategically along the Mohawk River, Utica became a critical junction for both land and water traffic. But its real claim to fame in the canal era was its role in the textile industry. The canal brought in raw cotton from the south via New York City, and the finished textiles were shipped back out to a national market. Mills lined the canal banks, their machinery powered by the region's abundant water sources. Utica became a center of manufacturing, a place where raw materials were transformed into valuable goods, all thanks to the connectivity the canal provided. And finally, we arrive at the western terminus, the king of the canal cities, Buffalo. Before the canal, Buffalo was a small village, still recovering from being burned down in the War of 1812. The completion of the Erie Canal in 1825 changed everything. It became the gateway to the Great Lakes and the vast American interior. Goods from the East, tools, textiles, and manufactured products flowed into Buffalo to be loaded onto lake schooners. In the other direction, grain, lumber, and raw materials from the Midwest poured into Buffalo's massive grain elevators before being transferred to canal boats. For the trip to the Hudson River and beyond, Buffalo became a transshipment colossus, a frenetic, bustling port city where fortunes were made and lost. Its harbor was a forest of masts and smokestacks, and its streets buzzed with the energy of a city at the center of a continental trade network. The canal didn't just help Buffalo grow. literally made Buffalo the Queen City of the Lakes. These four cities, Syracuse, Rochester, Utica, and Buffalo, are the most famous examples. But they weren't alone. Countless smaller towns like Lockport, with its incredible flight of locks, or Little Falls, nestled in a dramatic gorge, also blossomed along the canal's 363-mile route. Each one became a vital link in a chain of prosperity. Taverns, hotels, blacksmith shops, and general stores sprang up to serve the boatmen, the passengers, and the growing local populations. What's so fascinating is how the canal physically and culturally shaped these places. Main streets often ran parallel to the canal. The Canal District became the commercial heart of town. New ideas and diverse people traveled the waterway just as easily as barrels of flour or salt. News from the East Coast arrived in days instead of weeks, connecting these frontier towns to the national conversation. The canal was an information superhighway long before the internet, fostering a shared identity and accelerating social change. So when we look at a map of New York today, the string of cities along the path of the old canal is no accident. It's a direct legacy of that ambitious project. The canal acted as a powerful engine of urbanization, transforming a wilderness into a corridor of thriving communities. It demonstrates a fundamental principle. When you connect people and create opportunities for trade, you create prosperity. These cities are living monuments to the vision and hard work of those who dug the canal, proving that sometimes the greatest things are built one shovelful at a time. Thank you so much for joining me on this exploration of the canal towns. It's a powerful reminder of how infrastructure can literally build a nation from the ground up. If you enjoyed this chapter of our story, please hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. We'd love to have you along for the rest of the journey. See you next time. Picture this: October 26, 1825. A crisp autumn morning in Buffalo, New York. A palpable buzz hangs in the air, a mixture of excitement, pride, and sheer disbelief. For 8 long, arduous years, thousands of men had toiled, digging, blasting, and building what many had mockingly called Clinton's Ditch. They had carved a 363-mile ribbon of water, through dense forests, across treacherous swamps, and over solid rock, connecting the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean. Today, that ditch, the Erie Canal, was finally complete. The celebration was set to be a spectacle for the ages. A grand procession led by the man whose vision and relentless determination made it all possible, Governor DeWitt Clinton. The centerpiece of this flotilla was the Seneca Chief, a magnificent packet boat painted in patriotic reds, whites, and blues. It wasn't just a boat, it was a symbol of triumph, a testament to human ingenuity and perseverance. As Governor Clinton stepped aboard, the crowd erupted. This wasn't just the launch of a canal. It was the dawn of a new era for America. At precisely 10 a.m., a cannon boomed in Buffalo. This wasn't a solitary blast. It was the start of the most ingenious telegraph system of its time, a cannon telegraph. Another cannon, positioned within earshot down the canal, heard the first and fired its own. This thunderous relay continued, cannon to cannon, all the way from Buffalo, along the Mohawk River, down the Hudson, to New York City. In just 81 minutes, a stunningly short time for the era. The message traveled over 500 miles, announcing to the world that the Seneca Chief had begun its historic journey. The West was now officially connected to the East. Aboard the Seneca Chief, the atmosphere was jubilant. Governor Clinton was accompanied by a host of dignitaries, politicians, and canal commissioners. But the real stars of the show were 2 ornate kegs. These weren't filled with ale or rum. They held something far more precious, far more symbolic, water drawn directly from Lake Erie. This water represented the vast, untapped resources of the American interior, the promise of the West. The entire journey was designed to be a moving celebration, a 10-day party floating down the brand-new waterway. As the flotilla, led by the Seneca Chief, glided east, every town and village along the canal erupted in celebration. People lined the banks, waving flags, cheering, and firing their own smaller cannons and muskets. At Rochester, the boat passed over the magnificent stone aqueduct that carried the canal high above the Genesee River, true engineering marvel that left spectators in awe. In Syracuse, known as the Salt City, a grand ball was held in Clinton's honor. In Utica and Schenectady, parades marched through the streets. It was a slow, deliberate journey, averaging about 4 miles per hour. This leisurely pace allowed the passengers and the nation to truly absorb the magnitude of the achievement. They weren't just traveling through New York. They were traveling through a transformed landscape. Just a decade earlier, this route was a grueling, weeks-long ordeal by wagon over muddy, rutted roads. Now, goods and people could glide smoothly and affordably. The canal was more than a waterway. It was a highway of progress, an artery pumping new life into the young nation. The Seneca Chief wasn't just carrying dignitaries and lake water. Its cargo hold was filled with products from the West: flour, butter, and potash, made from the ashes of cleared forests. These goods were tangible proof of the canal's economic promise. They were a message to the merchants of New York City and the markets of Europe that the American heartland was open for business. The boat itself became a floating exhibition of westward expansion. As the procession neared Albany, the capital, the celebrations reached a fever pitch. A massive parade, complete with military bands and civic groups, welcomed Clinton and his entourage. Here, the canal boats were lashed to steamboats for the final, swifter leg of the journey down the Hudson River. The transition from the calm, mule-pulled pace of the canal to the steam-powered churn of the river was symbolic in itself. It represented the fusion of two great technologies, the canal and the steamboat, that together would revolutionize American commerce and travel. Finally, on the morning of November 4th, the flotilla arrived in New York Harbor. The city went wild. The harbor was a forest of masts, as hundreds of ships decorated with flags and banners from every nation gathered to witness the grand finale. The cannon telegraph had done its job. The whole city knew they were coming. Church bells pealed, cannons fired in salute from forts around the harbor, and tens of thousands of people thronged the shores of Manhattan and Brooklyn. It was, by all accounts, the largest celebration the city had ever seen. The flotilla sailed to the edge of the Atlantic, just past Sandy Hook. Here, the climax of the entire 10-day spectacle was about to unfold. Governor Clinton stood at the bow of the Seneca Chief, holding one of the ceremonial kegs. The crowd fell into a hushed silence. He raised the keg high, and in a clear, strong voice, delivered a short, powerful speech. He spoke of the union of the inland seas, with the ocean of the bond between the people of the interior and the people of the coast. Then, with all eyes on him, he poured the fresh water of Lake Erie into the salty brine of the Atlantic Ocean. The act was simple, yet profound. This was the wedding of the waters. It was a symbolic consummation of a national dream, the joining of two worlds. As the fresh water mingled with the salt, a cheer went up from the assembled fleet, a roar that echoed across the water. It was a cry of victory, of a promise fulfilled. To complete the ceremony, Dr. Samuel Mitchell, a naturalist and scholar, scooped a bottle of Atlantic water to be carried back to Buffalo on the return trip and poured into Lake Erie, symbolizing the eternal two-way connection. The wedding of the waters was more than just a ceremony. It was a brilliant piece of political and cultural theater that captured the nation's imagination. It announced that America was no longer just a collection of coastal states. It was a continental nation, with a vast, rich interior now accessible to the world. The Erie Canal wasn't just a ditch. It was the key that unlocked the economic potential of a continent. It would make New York City the financial capital of the world, spur westward migration, and fundamentally reshape the American landscape and economy for a century to come. The water poured that day was a baptism, marking the birth of a new, more connected, and more powerful United States of America. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey back in time. If you are fascinated by the story of the Erie Canal's grand opening, please give this video a thumbs up. And subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the moments that shaped history. We love hearing from you. So drop a comment below and let us know what historical event you'd like to see next. We'll see you in the next video. Hello and welcome back to our series. Today we embark on Chapter 12, The Journey Itself. Having explored the monumental effort of its construction, it's time to experience the Erie Canal as it was meant to be a living, breathing artery of commerce and life. So, climb aboard, find a comfortable spot on deck, and let's cast off into the past. Imagine the gentle, rhythmic sloshing of water against the hull of our packet boat. There's no roar of an engine, no hiss of steam, just the steady, determined pull of mules or horses on the towpath beside us. Look over there, you can see the hoggy, the young boy or man walking alongside the animals. His calls echoing softly in the air, urging them onward. This was the pulse of the canal, a steady for miles an hour, day and night. The world didn't rush by, it unfolded. This journey isn't just about speed. It's about the life that flourished along these banks. We are not alone on this waterway. Ahead, a line boat, laden with a family's entire worldly possessions, makes its slow way west. You can see them on deck perrons, watching the horizon. Children pointing at a heron waiting in the shallows. They're heading towards a new life in Ohio or Michigan, their dreams packed alongside their furniture and farming tools. The canal wasn't just a route. It was the very vessel of westward expansion, carrying hope on its gentle current. Look to the other side. A freighter, low in the water, is piled high with barrels of flour from Rochester or salt from Syracuse, heading east towards the bustling markets of Albany and New York City. The farmer steering the tiller gives us a nod as we pass. For him, the canal has transformed his world. Before getting his goods to market was a treacherous, bonjoring journey by wagon over rough roads. Now, he can ship his harvest cheaply and reliably, connecting his small farm to the vast Atlantic economy. This peaceful waterway is, in fact, a revolution in commerce, happening right before our eyes. Life on a packet boat like ours was a unique social experiment. We're sharing this space with merchants from New York City, elegantly dressed European tourists, rough-and-tumble frontiersmen, and preachers looking to spread the word. In the evenings, the main cabin transforms from a dining hall into a communal dormitory. Curtains are drawn, creating tiered sleeping berths. It's cramped, there's little privacy, and the air gets thick, but it's also a place of stories. Strangers become temporary neighbors, sharing tales of where they've been and where they're going, their voices a low murmur under the soft glow of oil lamps. But the journey is more than just the boat itself. Every few miles we pass through a lock. It's a marvel of engineering and a moment of excitement. As the massive wooden gates swing open, we glide into the stone chamber, and the gates close behind us. Then, with the turn of a crank, water either floods in or drains out, lifting or lowering our boat to the next level of the canal. Crowds often gathered at the locks. They were the social hubs of the canal. Children would sell fresh berries or buttermilk to passengers, and local news and gossip were exchanged. It was a brief, welcome pause in the steady rhythm of the journey, a moment to stretch our legs and connect with the world on shore. As we glide through the countryside, the landscape is a changing canvas. We pass through dense forests, their ancient trees forming a canopy over the water. Then the view opens up to rolling farmland, where fields of wheat and corn stretch to the horizon. We see small, industrious towns that have sprung up along the canal's path, their existence entirely owed to this man-made river. We hear the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, smell the sweet scent of a bakery, and see smoke rising from the chimneys of new homes. The canal wasn't just cutting through the wilderness, it was seeding civilization in its wake. Listen closely. Beyond the plodding hooves and the creak of the tow rope, you can hear the sounds of the journey. The distant lowing of cattle, the laughter of children playing by the water's edge. The mournful cry of the boatman's horn, announcing our approach to a low bridge. "Low bridge, everybody down," the captain would shout, and everyone on deck, ourselves included, would have to duck quickly to avoid a nasty bump on the head. It was a signature experience of canal travel, a small shared moment of alertness in an otherwise tranquil trip. This journey, this slow, formal glide through the heart of New York, was more than just transportation. It was a unique way of life. It was a world of its own, with its own pace, its own rules, and its own unique culture. For the thousands who traveled it, the journey itself was as transformative as the destination. It was a chance to see the nation unfolding, to meet its diverse people, and to be part of the great, flowing current of American progress. Thank you for joining me on this peaceful passage along the Erie Canal. The steady rhythm of the waterway has a way of calming the soul, doesn't it? If you enjoyed this journey back in time, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. We have many more chapters to explore together. Till next time, travel safely. Have you ever wondered how New York City became the concrete jungle where dreams are made of, the financial capital of the world? It wasn't always this way. In fact, a couple of 100 years ago, America was a very different place. The story of how New York rose to prominence is a tale of mud, sweat, and a revolutionary idea that shrunk the country and changed the global economy forever. Let's dive into the economic revolution that put the empire in the empire. Picture this. It's the early 1800s. America is expanding westward. You have hardworking farmers in what we now call the Midwest, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, producing incredible amounts of wheat, corn, and other goods. There's just one massive problem. How do they get their products to the bustling, hungry cities on the East Coast, like New York, Boston, and Philadelphia? The Appalachian Mountains stood like a giant wall. Getting goods over these mountains was a nightmare. The roads, if you could even call them that, were often just muddy tracks. A wagon pulled by a team of horses could only carry a small amount. And the journey was slow, treacherous, and incredibly expensive. Imagine paying more to ship a ton of grain a few hundred miles over land than to ship it all the way across the Atlantic Ocean to Europe. It was absurd. For a farmer in Ohio, it often made more sense to just turn their corn into whiskey, which was easier to transport, or just feed it to their pigs. The vast agricultural heartland of America was effectively cut off from the major commercial centers. The nation was economically divided. This transportation bottleneck was choking the young country's potential. Leaders and businessmen knew something had to change. They needed a faster, cheaper, and more reliable way to connect the interior with the coast. The answer wasn't going to come from the roads, it was going to come from the water. And one project in particular would prove to be the ultimate game changer: the Erie Canal. The idea was audacious, almost crazy for its time. Dig a 363-mile, man-made river across the rugged terrain of upstate New York, linking the Hudson River, which flows into the Atlantic at New York City, with Lake Erie, one of the Great Lakes. Critics scoffed, calling it Clinton's ditch after its main proponent, Governor DeWitt Clinton. They said it was too long, too expensive, and just plain impossible. There were no civil engineers in America at the time who had ever tackled a project of this magnitude. The men who built it literally had to invent the tools and techniques as they went along, but they did it. For 8 long years, from 1817 to 1825, thousands of laborers, many of them Irish immigrants, toiled with shovels, pickaxes, and wheelbarrows. They blasted through rock, built aqueducts to carry the canal over rivers, and engineered a series of ingenious locks to raise and lower boats over the changing elevation. When the Erie Canal finally opened, it was an engineering marvel, the longest artificial waterway in the world. Its impact was immediate and staggering. Before the canal, it cost about $100 to ship a ton of freight from Buffalo, on Lake Erie, to New York City. It took weeks. After the canal opened, that same journey cost less than $10 and took about a week. That's a 90% drop in shipping costs. Right. 90%. Suddenly, the floodgates were open. Wheat from Ohio, lumber from Michigan, and all sorts of goods from the Midwest could be loaded onto barges, floated down the canal to the Hudson River, and delivered right to the docks of New York City. For the first time, Midwest farms were truly connected to East Coast markets. It was a win-win. Farmers in the West got much better prices for their crops because they could now sell to a huge new customer base. In the East, food prices plummeted, making life more affordable for the growing urban population. The canal didn't just move goods, it moved people. Settlers poured westward, populating the new territories and states, knowing they could now build a life and a business connected to the national economy, and which city was sitting right at the end of this massive funnel of commerce? New York City. While other coastal cities like Boston and Philadelphia had to rely on the old, expensive, overland routes, New York now had an exclusive water highway straight into the heart of the continent. Goods didn't just flow into New York. European manufactured goods, textiles, and other imports that arrived at New York's port could now be shipped efficiently westward, making the city the undisputed hub for both domestic and international trade. The Erie Canal transformed New York from just one of several important port cities into the premier commercial hub of the United States. Its population exploded. Banks, insurance companies, and shipping firms flocked to the city to finance and manage this new wave of trade. The New York Stock Exchange grew in importance, as capital was needed for all these new ventures. The city's destiny was sealed, became the gateway to America, the financial engine that would power the nation's growth for the next century and beyond. This economic revolution, kicked off by a ditch dug through the wilderness, demonstrates the incredible power of infrastructure. By simply solving a transportation problem, the Erie Canal unleashed the agricultural might of the Midwest, fueled the industrial growth of the East, and cemented New York City's status as a global metropolis. It was a bold investment that paid off in ways its creators could have hardly imagined, fundamentally reshaping the economic geography of the nation. So the next time you think of New York City, remember that its towering skyscrapers are built on a foundation, laid not just with steel and concrete, but with the grit of canal diggers, and the vision of those who dared to connect a nation by water. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you enjoyed this story and want to learn more about the forces that shaped our world, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next video. We'll see you in the next one. Have you ever wondered how New York City became the powerhouse it is today? The city that never sleeps, the concrete jungle where dreams are made. Well, a huge piece of that puzzle lies not in Manhattan's skyscrapers, but in a 363-mile ditch dug across the state. This is the story of how the Erie Canal transformed New York from just another port city into the Empire State. Before the 1820s, America was a divided country, not by politics, but by geography. The Appalachian Mountains stood like a colossal wall, cutting off the bustling coastal cities from the vast, resource-rich interior. Getting goods from, say, Ohio to New York City was a nightmare. You'd have to haul them overland on muddy, rutted roads, a journey that was slow, expensive, and incredibly inefficient. It could take weeks, and the cost of transport was often many times the value of the goods themselves. The American heartland was effectively landlocked. Leaders like Governor DeWitt Clinton of New York saw this challenge not as a barrier, but as an opportunity. He championed a wildly ambitious, might even say crazy, idea to build a man-made river, a canal connecting the Hudson River, which flows into New York Harbor, all the way to Lake Erie and the Great Lakes. This would create a continuous water route from the Atlantic Ocean straight into the heart of North America. The critics were loud and numerous. They called it Clinton's folly and Clinton's ditch. They scoffed at the idea of digging a canal over 350 miles through forests, swamps, and solid rock, all without modern machinery. The federal government, led by President Thomas Jefferson, thought the project was a century too early and refused to fund it. But Clinton and his supporters persevered. In 1817, with state funding, the monumental task began. The construction via Lancia was a marvel of human ingenuity and sheer grit. The workforce was largely composed of Irish immigrants, who toiled from sunrise to sunset with pickaxes, shovels, and black powder. They faced malaria from the swamps, deadly construction accidents, and brutal weather. But they were brilliant innovators. To overcome the 568-foot change in elevation between the Hudson River and Lake Erie, they built an ingenious system of 83 locks. Locks are like water elevators for boats, allowing them to be raised or lowered to the next section of the canal. They designed aqueducts to carry the canal over rivers and valleys. It was one of the greatest engineering feats of its time, all accomplished by a young nation flexing its muscles. On October 26, 1825, the Erie Canal officially opened. To celebrate, Governor Clinton took a ceremonial journey from Buffalo to New York City on a packet boat named the Seneca Chief. In a famous ceremony, he poured a keg of water from Lake Erie into the Atlantic Ocean, an act he called the Wedding of the Waters. This gesture symbolized the union of the American interior with the wider world. The marriage was a success, and the honeymoon was about to begin. The impact was immediate and revolutionary. Before the canal, shipping a ton of flour from Buffalo to New York City cost over $100 and took about 20 days. After the canal, that same ton of flour cost less than $10 and took only 6 to 8 days. Suddenly, the floodgates of commerce were thrown wide open. Grain, lumber, and other agricultural products from the Midwest poured eastward into New York City, which became the primary hub for exporting these goods to Europe. In return, manufactured goods, furniture, clothing, and imported luxuries traveled westward on the canal, supplying the rapidly growing settlements of the interior. The canal wasn't just a one-way street. It was a bustling two-way superhighway of water. This torrent of trade transformed New York City. The population exploded. In 1820, it was a respectable port city with about 123,000 people. By 1860, it was a sprawling metropolis of over 800,000, making it the largest city in the Western Hemisphere. The harbor teemed with ships from all over the world, its docks piled high with goods. Banks, insurance companies, and trading houses cuisas sprouted up to handle the massive increase in financial transactions. Wall Street, which had been a modest financial center, began its ascent to become the financial capital of the world. New York City wasn't just a gateway to America anymore. It was the gatekeeper. The canal's influence didn't stop at the city limits, fueled the growth of entirely new cities along its route. Places like Syracuse, Rochester, and Buffalo, which were small villages before the canal, boomed into major industrial and commercial centers. Syracuse became the salt capital, Rochester, the flower city, and Buffalo the grand transfer point between Great Lakes shipping and the canal. The Erie Canal created a vibrant economic corridor across the entire state. It also had a profound social impact. It became a channel for ideas, not just goods. Reform movements, new religious ideas, and political philosophies traveled along the canal with the people. The region along the canal became known as the burned-over district because of the intense religious revivals that swept through it. The canal facilitated the westward migration of countless families seeking new lives and opportunities on the frontier. The Erie Canal cemented New York's status as the Empire State. Its economic dominance was unrivaled. By the mid-19th century, New York handled more trade than all other American ports combined. The wealth generated by the canal funded public schools, libraries, and other civic improvements, further enhancing the state's prestige and power. While the rise of railroads in the late 19th century eventually diminished the canal's commercial importance, its legacy is undeniable. The Erie Canal didn't just move goods, it moved a nation. It physically and economically unified a young country, accelerated westward expansion, and single-handedly propelled New York City onto the world stage. So, the next time you think of New York, remember that its foundation isn't just built on Manhattan's bedrock, but also on the waters of a 363-mile ditch that connected a city to a continent and an ambition to an empire. It's a powerful reminder of how a single bold vision can change the course of history. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this piece of history fascinating, please give this video a like. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about how our world came to be. See you in the next one. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into a story of mud, sweat, and water, a story about how a simple ditch transformed a nation. We're talking about the canals that reshaped America's interior in the 19th century. Before the canals, imagine America as a country largely clinging to the Atlantic coast. The vast lands west of the Appalachian Mountains were like a locked treasure chest. Sure, people could get there, but it was a grueling, expensive journey over rough roads and treacherous mountain passes. Moving goods? Even harder. A farmer in Ohio might grow a fantastic crop of wheat, but getting it to the big markets in New York City was almost impossible. It could cost more to ship goods 30 miles overland than to ship them all the way to Europe. The nation's great potential was literally stuck in the mud. Then came an idea that seemed almost crazy at the time. Let's build man-made rivers. The most famous of these, the Erie Canal, became the stuff of legend. Completed in 1825, this 363-mile waterway was a marvel of engineering, connecting the Hudson River in the east to the Great Lakes in the west. Suddenly, that locked treasure chest was blown wide open. Think about the impact. The cost to ship a ton of goods from Buffalo to New York City plummeted from around $100 to less than $10. The travel time was cut by more than half. It was like discovering a superhighway overnight. This wasn't just a convenience, it was a revolution. For the first time, the agricultural heartland of the Midwest was directly linked to the booming commercial centers of the East Coast, and by extension, to the entire world. This new connection ignited a firestorm of migration. People who once saw the West as a distant, inaccessible frontier now saw it as a land of opportunity. Families packed their belongings onto canal boats and floated toward a new life. They weren't just lone adventurers anymore. They were farmers, merchants, and artisans, seeking affordable land and fresh starts. The trickle of westward settlement became a flood. Towns and cities exploded along the canal routes. Places that were once quiet little outposts became bustling hubs of commerce and activity. Look at cities like Rochester, Syracuse, Buffalo, and New York. They boomed because they were right on the Erie Canal. Grain elevators shot up, warehouses were built, and new businesses sprang up to serve the constant flow of people and goods. Further west, the canals feeding into the Great Lakes system helped build cities like Cleveland and Chicago. These weren't just dots on a map. They were brand new communities, a testament to the canal's power to create life where there was once wilderness. The demographic shift was staggering. States like Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois saw their populations skyrocket. Between 1820 and 1840, Ohio's population more than doubled. This wasn't just about numbers. It was about the creation of a new American identity. These weren't New Englanders or Virginians anymore. They were Midwesterners, a new breed of pioneers, building a society from the ground up, fueled by the promise of the canal. The canals also transformed the economic landscape. Farmers in the Midwest could now specialize in cash crops like wheat and corn, knowing they had a reliable and cheap way to get their produce to market. In turn, they could afford to buy manufactured goods from the East textiles, tools and furniture that arrived on the return journey of the canal boats. This created a powerful, interconnected national economy. The North became the industrial workshop, and the West became the breadbasket, the canals acting as the vital arteries carrying the lifeblood of commerce between them. But the canals were more than just economic engines. They were conduits of ideas and culture. News, books, and political ideologies traveled along the waterways just as easily as barrels of flour. The people who settled the new towns brought their values, their religions, and their social structures with them, creating a vibrant and diverse cultural tapestry across the interior. The isolation that had once defined frontier life began to fade, replaced by a sense of being part of a larger, connected nation. Of course, the canal era was relatively short-lived. By the mid-19th century, a new technology was on the horizon: the railroad. The iron horse was faster, more versatile, and could go where water couldn't. Gradually, the canals fell into decline, many becoming the quiet, scenic waterways we see today. But we can't overstate their importance. They were the crucial first step. The canals proved that it was possible to conquer the vast distances of the American continent. They laid the groundwork, both literally and figuratively, for the railroads that would follow. They established the trade routes, built the cities, and moved the people that would define the nation's westward expansion for the rest of the century. So, the next time you see a picture of a quiet, tree-lined canal, remember its explosive past. It wasn't just a ditch filled with water. It was a superhighway of its time, a catalyst that unlocked the American interior, sparked unprecedented population growth, and helped forge the United States into a continental nation. It's a powerful reminder of how a single, bold idea can change the course of history. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this journey into America's past interesting, please hit that like button. And subscribe for more stories about how we got to where we are today. Let me know in the comments what piece of history you'd like to explore next. See you in the next video. Hey everyone, and welcome back to our deep dive into the Erie Canal. So far, we've talked about the incredible engineering, the backbreaking labor, and the economic boom it created. But the canal did something even more profound, did reshape the very fabric of American society and culture. Today in Chapter 16, we're exploring how this ditch became a powerful engine for cultural and social change, connecting people and ideas like never before. Ready to see how a waterway could change hearts and minds? Let's get started. Before the Erie Canal, America was a patchwork of isolated communities. A farmer in Ohio might have more in common with someone in Kentucky than in New York City. The mountains and dense forests weren't just physical barriers. They were cultural divides. News traveled at the speed of a horse. Ideas trickled slowly from town to town, and a sense of a shared national identity was still a fragile concept. The country was vast, and people's worlds were often very small, limited to their immediate surroundings. But all of that was about to change. The canal wasn't just built to move goods. It was about to move people, and with them their stories, traditions, and dreams. Imagine this. You're a farmer in the Ohio Valley. Before the canal, your world was your farm, your local market, and maybe the next town over. Now, Thanks to this new waterway, you're loading your wheat onto a boat headed directly for New York City, the nation's biggest port. Suddenly, you're connected to a global market. You start meeting traders from the city, hearing news from the East Coast, and learning about prices and politics that were once completely foreign to you. The canal became a two-way street. While your crops went east, goods, fashions, and books from the city flowed west, bringing a taste of urban life to the frontier. This connection broke down the isolation that had defined rural life for centuries, and it wasn't just farmers. Traders and merchants who once faced treacherous overland journeys now glided along the canal. They established new businesses in burgeoning canal towns like Syracuse, Rochester, and Buffalo. These men weren't just selling salt or textiles. They were carriers of information, brought stories from their travels, discussed business trends, and debated the politics of the day with people they met at every lock and every port. The towpath became a sprawling, 363-mile-long social network. It was here that a New England merchant could strike up a conversation with a German immigrant, sharing perspectives and forging a new, distinctly American identity. Speaking of immigrants, the canal was a lifeline for countless people seeking a new beginning. For Irish immigrants fleeing famine and poverty, the canal offered not just jobs during its construction, but a direct route into the heartland of America. They settled along its banks, building communities and bringing their unique culture, their music, their faith, and their resilient spirit with them. They were joined by Germans, English, and others, each group adding a new thread to the American tapestry. The canal towns became melting pots, places where different languages, foods, and traditions mixed and mingled. This wasn't always a smooth process, of course, but it was the start of the multicultural America we know today. Beyond people, the canal was a superhighway for ideas. Before, it could take weeks for a newspaper from New York City to reach the western frontier. Now, it took mere days. News of elections, scientific discoveries, and national debates spread with unprecedented speed. This created a more informed and engaged public. People in Buffalo were reading the same news and discussing the same issues as people in Albany. This shared information helped foster a sense of national unity, tying the young country together with common knowledge and shared conversations. The canal effectively shrank the nation, making it feel more connected and cohesive. This rapid exchange of ideas had a particularly powerful effect on social movements. The region along the Erie Canal became so fervent with religious revivals and reform movements that it was nicknamed the Burned-Over District. Preachers and social reformers could travel easily from town to town, spreading their messages to eager crowds. Movements for abolition, women's rights, and temperance found fertile ground in these newly connected communities. Ideas that might have once stayed local could now become regional and even national campaigns for change. The Seneca Falls Convention of 1848, the first women's rights convention in the United States, took place right in the heart of this canal-connected region. It's no coincidence that so many progressive ideas flourished where the flow of information was strongest. The canal also accelerated the pace of innovation. Need a new part for a mill in Rochester? Before, you might wait months for it to arrive overland. With the canal, you could get it in a week. This reliability spurred industrial growth and technological advancement all along the corridor. Engineers and inventors could travel, share blueprints, and observe new techniques in action. An innovation in boat design in Albany could be copied and improved upon in Buffalo within weeks. This collaborative environment, fueled by easy travel and communication, turned the canal corridor into a hub of American ingenuity. It was a physical manifestation of progress, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. So when we look at the Erie Canal, it's crucial to see beyond the barges and the locks. We need to see the human connections it forged. It brought the isolated farmer into a national conversation. It allowed the ambitious trader to build a new life in a new town. It gave the hopeful immigrant a path to a brighter future. By breaking down the physical barriers that separated people, the canal also broke down the cultural and social ones. It mixed people and ideas, creating a dynamic, diverse, and forward-thinking society along its banks. It helped transform a collection of disparate states into a more unified nation, bound together by water, commerce, and a steady stream of new ideas. The legacy of the Erie Canal isn't just in the economic power it unleashed, but in the cultural landscape it created. It demonstrated that infrastructure is never just about moving things. It's about moving people, shaping communities, and spreading the ideas that define a nation. It literally and figuratively deepened the channels of American life. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the cultural impact of the Erie Canal. It's a powerful reminder of how one great project can change a country in ways its builders never even imagined. If you found this interesting, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for more stories like this. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. We'll see you next time. Hey everyone, welcome back to our journey along the historic Erie Canal. We've talked about the engineering marvels, the economic impact, and the people who built it. But today we're diving into something a little different, the soul of the canal. We're exploring the songs, the stories, and the legends that were born on its waters and echoed along its towpaths. Imagine this. A long, slow journey on a canal boat. Days are spent guiding the mules. Nights are spent under the stars. What do you do to pass the time? You sing, you tell stories. And that's exactly what they did. The canal became a living, breathing artery of culture, not just commerce. The people who lived and worked on it, the hoggies, the captains, the lock tenders. The families created a unique world of folklore all their own. Probably the most famous piece of canal culture is a song you might already know. See if this sounds familiar. I've got a mule. Her name is Sal. 15 miles on the Erie Canal. That's right. It's a low bridge. Everybody down. Also known as the Erie Canal Song. Written in 1905 by Thomas S. Allen. This song is a nostalgic look back at the glory days of the canal, a time when mules, not engines, pulled the boats. The lyrics paint such a vivid picture. Low bridge, everybody down. Wasn't just a catchy phrase, it was a real, practical warning. The canal had numerous low bridges, and if you were on the deck of a packet boat, you had to duck quickly to avoid a nasty knock on the head. The song captures the rhythm of life on the canal, the slow, steady pace of the mule, the camaraderie of the crew, and the connection to the towns they passed through. It's a love letter to a bygone era. The low bridge is just the tip of the iceberg. There were countless other songs, many of them work shanties. These songs had a rhythm that matched the work being done, whether it was pulling a boat through a difficult section or guiding the mules. They were often filled with inside jokes, complaints about the food or the captain, and stories of life on the big ditch. They were a way to build community and make the hard, monotonous labor a little more bearable. Think of them as the original podcasts for canal workers. They sang about famous mules, legendary boat captains, and close calls at the locks. These weren't professional compositions. They were folk songs, passed down from one generation of canalers to the next, changing and evolving with each telling. Sadly, many of these authentic rough-and-tumble work songs have been lost to time, but the spirit of them lives on in the more polished versions that were eventually written down. Beyond the music, the canal was a fertile ground for tall tales and legends. The hoggies, the young boys and men who drove the mules, were famous storytellers. Life on the towpath could be lonely, and they would often pass the time spinning yarns to each other or to wide-eyed locals in the taverns along the way. They told stories of ghost mules that still walked the towpath at night, their harnesses jingling in the fog. One popular legend is that of the Witch of the Dismal Swamp. The Great Dismal Swamp, a section of the canal in central New York, was a spooky, isolated place. Locals claimed a witch lived deep within the swamp, and boaters would report strange lights and eerie sounds as they passed through at night. Was it just the spooky atmosphere playing tricks on their minds, or was there something more to it? These stories added a layer of mystery and excitement to the journey. There were also tales of incredible feats of strength and skill. Legendary captains who could navigate the trickiest parts of the canal in total darkness, or mule drivers who had an almost supernatural connection with their animals. One story tells of a hoggy whose mule, named Old Tuffy, was so smart it could open lock gates with its teeth. Probably not true, but it speaks to the deep bond between the drivers and their animals. Mules were the engines of the canal, and they were often treated as part of the family, earning their own legendary status. They created a shared identity for the people of the canal. They were canalers, a unique breed of people with their own language, customs, and folklore. When you heard someone singing a canal shanty or telling a tale about a ghost mule, you knew they were part of your world. It was a culture built on shared experience, hard work, and the slow, steady rhythm of the water. This folklore also helped to mythologize the canal itself. It wasn't just a ditch filled with water. It was a place of adventure, of danger, of heroes and villains. It was a place where fortunes could be made and lost, where a simple farm boy could become a legendary boat captain. The songs and stories transformed the Erie Canal from an infrastructure project into a key part of the American story, a symbol of progress, grit, and the adventurous spirit of the nation. Even today, the legacy of this culture lives on. Folk singers continue to perform the old canal songs, keeping the music alive for new generations. Storytellers gather at festivals along the old canal route, sharing the legends of the Hoggies and their phantom mules. These traditions remind us that the canal was more than just stone and water. It was a vibrant community, a flowing river of stories that helped shape the culture of New York and the entire country. The next time you walk along a section of the old towpath or see one of the restored locks, take a moment and listen. You might not hear the clip-clop of mule hooves or the captain shouting, "Low bridge." But if you listen closely, you can almost hear the faint echo of a song carrying on the breeze, a melody from a time when the Erie Canal was the heart of a nation, and its stories were the songs of America. Thanks so much for joining me on this cultural deep dive into the Erie Canal. It's fascinating how history is preserved not just in books, but in music and stories. If you enjoyed this, please give the video a thumbs up, and do want to forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you do and miss the next chapter in our journey. See you next time. Hello history buffs and welcome back to our series. Today we re-diving into a pivotal moment in American history, the Great Transportation Revolution of the 19th century. We've talked at length about the monumental achievement that was the Erie Canal, a waterway that truly shaped the nation. But as the 1830s and 40s rolled on, a new sound began to echo across the landscape, the chuffing of steam and the whistle of a locomotive. This was the dawn of the railroad era, and it was about to change everything. Imagine the scene in the early 1850s. For decades, the canal was king.
Oh, yes.
It was the superhighway of its time, a reliable, if slow method for moving immense quantities of goods. Towns and cities had sprung up along its banks, their fortunes tied to the steady flow of barges. But then came the iron horse. At first, railroads were seen as a novelty, a feeder system for the canals. Early lines were often short, connecting nearby towns or linking a quarry to a waterway. They were expensive to build and faced immense technical challenges. Think about it: laying track required leveling hills, building bridges over rivers, and blasting tunnels through mountains. It was a Herculean effort. Compared to the placid pace of a mule-drawn barge, which moved at about 4 miles per hour, the early steam locomotives were lightning fast. Reaching speeds of 20 to 30 miles per hour, this wasn't just an improvement, it was a quantum leap. A journey that took a week by canal could now be completed in a single day by rail. And the railroads had another killer advantage. They ran year-round. While canals like the Erie froze solid for months in the winter, bringing commerce to a standstill, the trains kept rolling through snow and ice. This reliability was a game-changer for merchants and manufacturers who depended on a constant flow of materials and products. As technology improved, the cost of building and operating railroads began to drop. Visionaries like Cornelius Vanderbilt, who initially made his fortune in steamships, saw the writing on the wall. He and others began consolidating the patchwork of small local rail lines into vast, interconnected networks. Suddenly, you could ship goods from New York City all the way to Chicago without ever touching a boat. The railroad network was expanding at a breathtaking pace, crisscrossing the country and opening up new territories. For settlement and economic development, far from any navigable river or canal. So, did this mean the instant death of the canal system? Not at all, and that's what makes this story so interesting. The Erie Canal, in particular, proved to be remarkably resilient. While passenger traffic quickly shifted to the faster and more comfortable trains, the canal had a secret weapon: bulk cargo.
Ow.
For heavy, low-value goods like grain, coal, lumber, and stone, speed wasn't the most critical factor. Cost was, and for hauling massive tonnage, it was simply cheaper to float it on a barge than to load it onto a freight train. The canal had already been paid for, and its operating costs were relatively low. So, While the railroads siphoned off the high-value freight and passenger business, the Erie Canal doubled down on what it did best. It remained the go-to artery for the agricultural bounty of the Midwest heading to the markets of the East Coast, and for the coal from Pennsylvania's mines fueling the factories of New York. For several decades, the two systems existed in a state of competitive coexistence. They were rivals, yes, but they also complemented each other. A farmer in Illinois might ship his grain by rail to Chicago, where it would be loaded onto a lake freighter, then transferred to an Erie Canal barge in Buffalo for the final leg to New York City. This era of competition actually spurred innovation on both sides. Railroads developed more powerful locomotives and specialized freight cars. In response, the Erie Canal underwent several enlargements to accommodate bigger barges that could carry even more cargo, further lowering the cost per ton. It was a fascinating duel between two different modes of transport, each with its own distinct advantages. The railroads had speed and year-round operation. The canal had sheer volume and low cost. This dynamic kept the Erie Canal economically vital, long after many other smaller canals had been abandoned and left to crumble. However, the tide of progress was undeniable. As the 19th century drew to a close, the railroad's advantages became overwhelming. The national rail network became so comprehensive and efficient that it could start to compete with the canal even on price, especially for longer hauls. The development of more powerful engines and air brakes made trains faster, safer, and capable of pulling longer and heavier loads. The flexibility of the railroad was unmatched. Tracks could be laid almost anywhere, connecting the nation's interior in a way waterways never could. By the early 20th century, the original Erie Canal was largely obsolete. Its role as the primary engine of commerce had been decisively taken over by the sprawling network of steel rails that now bound the continent together. Yet the story doesn't end there. Recognizing its continued, albeit diminished importance, New York State decided to rebuild the waterway one last time, creating the New York State Barge Canal System, which is still in operation today, mostly for recreational boating, but with some commercial traffic. So, the rise of the railroads wasn't a sudden event that wiped canals off the map overnight. It was a gradual, complex transition that unfolded over decades. The Erie Canal, the grand dame of American waterways, fought a long and valiant battle, adapting and evolving in the face of a powerful new technology. Its eventual decline wasn't a failure but a natural succession, a passing of the torch from one great transportation system to the next. The railroads built upon the national market that the canals first created, accelerating the pace of American life and industry into the modern era. The legacy of the canal is not just in the water that still flows, but in the foundation it laid for the nation that the railroads would then unite with bands of steel. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through Chapter 18. It's a powerful reminder that history is rarely about simple endings, but about complex and fascinating transitions. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into our shared past. We love hearing from you, so drop a comment below with your thoughts or questions. Until next time, stay curious. For nearly 2 centuries, we've journeyed along a waterway that carved a nation, a ribbon of ingenuity that connected a young republic and fueled its rise. We've seen its birth from an audacious dream, witnessed the backbreaking labor that brought it to life, and sailed through the boom years when it was the economic superhighway of America. But our story doesn't end in the sepia-toned pages of a history book. What happened to Clinton's ditch? Did it simply vanish? A relic of a bygone era, swallowed by the railroads and highways that followed? The answer, you might be surprised to learn, is a resounding no. Today we explore the living, breathing legacy of the Erie Canal. Welcome back to our final chapter. If you've been following our journey, thank you for sticking with us. And if you're just joining, you've picked a fantastic time to see how history isn't just something we read about it, something we can still touch, experience, and sail upon. The Erie Canal, far from being a forgotten ditch, has evolved. It's wider, deeper, and more sophisticated than the original ever was. But its spirit, its very essence, remains. This is the story of the New York State Canal System, a modern marvel with a legendary past. Let's rewind just a bit. The original 1825 canal, just 4 feet deep and 40 feet wide, was a sensation. But success breeds ambition. By the 1860s, it had already been enlarged, and by the early 20th century, a massive transformation took place. The canal was rerouted, widened to 120 feet, and deepened to 12 feet. Rivers like the Mohawk, Seneca, and Clyde were canalized, their natural paths integrated into the waterway. This new system, completed in 1918, was renamed the New York State Barge Canal. It was built to accommodate much larger, self-propelled barges, a far cry from the mule-drawn packets of the 19th century. This wasn't about replacing the canal. It was about ensuring its survival and continued relevance in a new industrial age. For decades, the barge canal continued its role as a commercial artery, transporting fuel, grain, and materials. But as the 20th century progressed, the interstate highway system and more efficient freight transport began to chip away at its commercial dominance. By the 1980s and 90s, many wondered if the canal had finally reached the end of its useful life. The locks were aging, traffic was dwindling, and the costs of maintenance were immense. Was it time to close the book on this incredible piece of American history? Absolutely not. A new vision for the canal was already taking shape. In 1992, the New York State Canal System was reimagined. While commercial traffic still exists, the focus shifted dramatically towards a new kind of commerce, recreation, and tourism. The very waterway that once carried wheat and lumber to market now carries pleasure boaters, kayakers, and history enthusiasts on a journey through time. The towpaths, where mules once trudged, have been reborn as the magnificent Erie Canal Way Trail. This nearly 400-mile multi-use path is a paradise for cyclists, runners, and walkers, offering a continuous scenic route from Buffalo to Albany. You can literally trace the path of history, one pedal or one footstep at a time, passing through the same charming towns that sprang up along the canal's banks 200 years ago. Today, traveling the canal is a vibrant, immersive experience. The historic locks, many of which are engineering marvels in their own right, are still in operation. Seeing the massive gates swing open and feeling your boat gently rise or fall 20, 30, even 40 feet is a truly inspiring moment. It connects you directly to the ingenuity of the past. Along the way, beautifully preserved canal towns like Fairport, Pittsford, and Brockport welcome visitors with open arms. Their waterfronts, once bustling with commercial activity, are now lined with charming restaurants, unique shops, and beautiful parks. It's a perfect blend of past and present. You can dock your boat and walk into a town that still feels like it as straight out of the 19th century, yet offers all the comforts of the 21st. The preservation of the canal is a monumental effort. The New York State Canal Corporation works tirelessly to maintain the locks, dredge the channel, and manage water levels. But it's more than just infrastructure. It's about preserving a story. Museums and interpretive centers. The route from the Erie Canal Museum in Syracuse, housed in the last remaining 1850s Waylock building, to the Chittenango Landing Canal Boat Museum, where you can see replicas of the boats that once plied these waters. These places aren't just collections of artifacts. They're gateways to understanding the human side of the canal, the lives of the boatmen, lock tenders, the families who lived and worked along its banks. The ecological importance of the canal is another critical part of its modern legacy. It's a managed water system that plays a role in flood control and provides water for agriculture and communities. Furthermore, it's a thriving greenway, a corridor of biodiversity that cuts across the state. Birdwatchers, anglers, and nature lovers find a haven along its quiet stretches. The canal has become a powerful example of how historic infrastructure can be repurposed to serve both human and environmental needs, a concept known as adaptive reuse. It's a sustainable model for preserving our heritage and the celebrations. Every year, communities all along the canal host festivals and events that bring the history of the waterway to life. From Canal Days in Fairport to the Waterford Tugboat Roundup. These events are a riot of color, music, and community spirit. You can watch historic reenactments, listen to traditional canal songs, and taste the local flavors that define each region. It's a testament to the deep-seated pride New Yorkers feel for their canal. It's not just a historic landmark. It's a part of their identity, so the Erie Canal's legacy is twofold. First, it is the undeniable historical impact. It physically and economically bound the United States together, established New York City as the nation's premier port, and set a precedent for the kind of ambitious, nation-building infrastructure projects that would define America. It was the internet of its day, a network that accelerated the flow of goods, people, and ideas. Its influence is etched into the very geography and demography of the state and the nation. But its second, living legacy is what we see today. It's a legacy of transformation, of a state and a people who refused to let their history crumble into ruin. They saw its potential not just as a relic, but as a resource for recreation, for education, for community building, and for a deeper connection to the American story. It's a reminder that the great works of the past, Dante, have to be abandoned. With vision and care, they can be adapted, cherished, and given new life for generations to come. From a 4-foot-deep ditch dug by hand to a modern recreational waterway and trail system, the Erie Canal's journey mirrors that of America itself, a story of bold ambition, constant adaptation, and enduring spirit. It stands today as a testament to the idea that our heritage isn't just something to look back on. It's a foundation upon which we can continue to build. The legacy of the Erie Canal isn't just alive, it's flowing, it's growing, and it's waiting for you to come and explore it. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible multi-part journey through the history of the Erie Canal. It has been an absolute pleasure to share this story with you. If you've enjoyed this series, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel so you don't miss our future explorations into the fascinating corners of history. Your support makes all of this possible. Till next time, keep exploring. Hello everyone, and welcome back. We've reached the final chapter of our journey, Chapter 20, Reflections by the Water. It feels fitting that our story should end here, by the quiet, shimmering surface of this ancient canal. Look at how the moonlight dances on the water, almost like a silver path stretching back through time. It's so peaceful now, isn't it? It's hard to imagine the sheer scale of the ambition and the immense human effort that brought this waterway into existence. For centuries, this canal was more than just a channel of water. It was the lifeblood of an empire, a pulsating artery of commerce, culture, and communication. It connected north and south, carrying rice, silk, porcelain, and most importantly, ideas. It was the physical manifestation of a unified nation, a bold statement carved into the very landscape of the country. Imagine standing here hundreds of years ago. The air would have been thick with the sounds of boatmen calling out, the gentle lapping of water against the hulls of countless barges, the scent of spices and goods from 1,000 miles away. Each ripple on this water tells a story. As we stand here under the moonlight, it's easy to feel the weight of history all around us. You can almost hear the echoes of footsteps on these stone banks, the footsteps of emperors, officials, merchants, soldiers, poets, and ordinary people. Each one of them played a part in this grand narrative. They lived, they worked, they dreamed, and their collective efforts flowed together. Much like the tributaries feeding this great canal, creating something far bigger than any single individual. Their dreams weren't just personal hopes. They were dreams for a better future, for prosperity, for connection, for a stronger nation. This canal was born from a monumental dream. It was a vision so audacious that it must have seemed impossible to many at the time. The logistics alone were staggering, mobilizing a workforce of millions, carving through mountains and engineering complex systems of locks and dams, all without the aid of modern technology. It required unwavering belief and a will of iron. It's a powerful reminder that the greatest achievements in human history often start as a single, powerful idea dream that someone dares to pursue against all odds. Think about the sheer human cost. The stories of the laborers are often lost to the grand sweep of history. But their sweat and sacrifice are embedded in every inch of this waterway. They were the ones who dug the earth, who laid the stones, who toiled under the sun and in the freezing cold. Their lives were poured into this project. And while we rightly celebrate the visionaries, we must also remember the countless anonymous hands that turned that vision into this enduring reality. Their legacy is not written in grand monuments, but in the quiet, persistent flow of this water. This canal fundamentally reshaped the nation. It didn't just move goods, it moved people and integrated economies. Regions that were once isolated and self-sufficient became part of a larger, interconnected whole. It fostered a sense of shared identity and purpose. The capital could be fed, the borders could be defended, and the culture could be unified, all thanks to this ribbon of water. It was the internet of its age, a revolutionary technology that shrank the world and accelerated the pace of change. The prosperity it generated fueled golden ages of art, science, and philosophy. And yet, like all great things, its golden era eventually passed. New technologies emerged. Railways and modern highways offered faster, more efficient means of transport. The canal, once the heart of the nation, slowly quieted down. The bustling traffic dwindled, and parts of it fell into disuse, becoming gentle, sleepy backwaters. But it was never truly forgotten. It had become part of the cultural landscape, a feature of the collective memory. Today we are witnessing a renaissance. There's a renewed appreciation for this incredible feat of engineering and its historical significance. Efforts are being made to preserve and revitalize it, not just as a relic of the past, but as a living part of the present. It's being reborn as a place for leisure, for tourism, and for quiet contemplation. People come here to walk, to reflect, and to connect with the history that flows silently beneath the surface. It has found a new purpose, a new way to serve the people. That brings us back to where we started, here by the water's edge. The moonlight reveals the same scene that countless generations have witnessed before us. The gentle lapping of the waves is the same sound they heard. In this moment, we are connected to them. We're part of this long, unbroken chain of history. The canal teaches us a profound lesson, that great dreams, backed by courage and collective effort, have the power to change the world. They can alter the course of rivers and the destiny of nations. It reminds us that the world we inhabit today was shaped by the dreamers of yesterday. And it poses a question to each of us. What dreams will we dare to dream? What will we build for the generations that come after us? The challenges we face may be different, but the fundamental human spirit of ambition, innovation, and perseverance remains the same. As our journey together comes to a close, I hope you feel that sense of connection, that quiet inspiration. The story of this canal is ultimately a story of hope. It shows us that even the most ambitious visions can become reality. So as we look at these reflections in the water one last time, let's carry that message with us. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible exploration. It has been a true privilege to share this story with you. If you've enjoyed this series, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It really helps us to continue making content like this. Till next time, take care and keep seeking the stories that connect us all.